Hi everyone, I'm Sidney McKinnon, CIO and MD of Cadiz Asset Management, and welcome once again to another edition of All Things Fixed Income. I'm often asked, as a local or as a South African fixed income environment, how is that fixed income environment affected by the global environment or the impact of the dynamics that is happening in the global environment? So, first of all, let's get some context. If we look at the South African bond market in particular, and we look at the size of the South African bond markets, the South African bond market is about 6.4 trillion, I think it is, that last count in size. And put in dollars, that's about $340 billion. The world fixed income or bond market is worth about, or is in the region of about $141.3 trillion. So you can see that the South African bond market is a small portion or fraction of the world bond market, only about 0.24% of the world bond market. So if things are happening in the world, even though we are quite small in relation to the world, make no mistake, we still get affected by the happenings globally. So the South African bond market is a very liquid market. It trades very well. It's a market that's very, very active as well. About 73% is in government bonds or government-issued bonds, but it's a very liquid and active market. And that activity and that activeness, if there's such a word, within the market makes it sensitive and susceptible to the global environment as well. Now, first of all, I think I need to mention that nothing happens in isolation. Even though we are a small market in the bigger scheme of things, everything is interrelated. And as much as large developed global fixed income or bond markets get affected by issues such as economic fundamentals or specific events or crises, so does our local bond market as well. And at the moment, there is quite a bit happening globally, largely in the event risk sphere. In other words, there's events that's happening, or a lot of uncertainty is being proliferated by what is happening in the global environment at the moment. And this stems largely from the American or the USA political administration that has instituted what is known as extra tariffs on countries abroad in terms of their trade agreements. And this has caused a lot of uncertainty and a lot of volatility in global markets, especially where currencies are concerned, especially where the bond markets is concerned. And we, as a South African bond market or local bond market, are by no means immune to the goings on the global stage, because we are directly affected by the amount of volatility that persists throughout the world. So, as an example, if tariffs tensions increase, it creates volatility, especially in currency markets. And our rand, being a very liquid currency, is traded just about everywhere in the world, is susceptible to the goings on of the volatility that you see around the globe. Then, of course, what will happen is that if, for example, an event such as tariff tensions escalates into potentially inflationary pressures across the globe, that could also translate into inflationary pressures in our local environment through imported inflation or through the more expensive prices of goods abroad, especially in the United States. So that could translate into inflationary pressures. And as we know, inflation is a big component of bond yields. It's expected inflation is embedded within bond yields across the curve. And I've mentioned this before in one of my talks before. A large part of that yield to maturity is your expected inflation. And if inflation is threatened in any way, or is threatened in a way that could make it a bit more sticky or could turn up in any form or shape, then that will be reflected within your bond yields, either negatively or it could actually be positively as well. By way of an example, so if, for example, vehicle prices in the USA rise as a result of the tariff increases that were being imposed on motor vehicle imports into the USA, we will see that this might lead to a decline in demand for vehicles within the US. And this will in turn lead to a decline in demand of car manufacturers outside of the US. That in turn might lead to a loss of demand of platinum group metals, which are used for the manufacture of parts within cars, for example, catalytic converters, etc., which means that the price of platinum group metals might be depressed as the demand drops as well. And with a drop in these prices, it could be deflationary. In other words, inflation might actually be suppressed. I know that this is only one part of an inflation basket, but metals form about 30% of our basket anyway, which has got an impact on our inflation numbers. So inflation numbers might actually be depressed or suppressed as a result of the loss of demand within the United States. So it's just an example as to how that affects inflation in our country, which in turn is embedded in the expected yields of bonds and eventually will affect the price of the bond within our local environment. That's just one example. The world at the moment is going through a very uncertain place. It is gripped by a lot of fear as to what is going to be happening, especially in terms of trade and tariffs and policy. And until that plays itself out, we may get a bit of stability. And it's inevitable that we'll see a bit of that volatility pulling through to our markets. However, we've been through many crises over the years, and nothing lasts forever. We will, however, see return to stability. The important thing here is, or the issue here is, we're not absolutely sure how long this will last. Nobody knows exactly how long this will last. However, within the fixed income environment, what's important to realize is that when you build your portfolios, do not build them for one specific event risk. You build your portfolios to last through these crises and take a view that is sustainable over your investment horizon so that you will not be overly surprised when a crisis does happen. That is inevitable. It will happen over the lifetime of your investments. So coming back to the topic for today, does the global environment or the dynamics globally, whether it's economic fundamental or political or event-driven, affect the local environment, how small as we are? Yes, it does. It does affect us. Maybe not as in as big a way as it would maybe some other developed countries, but most certainly because we are set up within an environment that is as sophisticated as many of the systems abroad, we will see that effect. So hopefully this has been a little bit enlightening in terms of the question of does the global environment affect our local environment? And I hope to take this discussion further at a later stage or in the future. But this is Sidney McKinnon, CIO and MD of Cadiz Asset Management. Thank you for watching.